Today's story begins with a truth no one expected. She died moments after revealing the secrets she had kept for years. Who was the man behind the smile she trusted, and what had she discovered that forced her hand? As the screen froze and the live went black, the world watched in horror, but what happened next, no one could have imagined. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, the room lit only by the soft glow of her phone. Outside, the city hummed as if nothing was about to change. Inside her chest, everything was breaking apart. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. For years, she had learned how to stay quiet, how to smile through discomfort, how to convince herself that silence was safer than truth. The Instagram app was already open. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened screen, eyes hollow, lips pressed together as if holding back a scream. She adjusted the camera, making sure her face was visible but the rest of the room stayed hidden. This wasn't about drama. This was about being heard, even if only for a moment. She thought about the first time she had almost spoken up. It was a memory she usually buried quickly, but tonight it surfaced on its own. A small argument, a door closed too hard, an apology that sounded rehearsed. Back then, she had told herself every marriage had cracks. She had believed love meant endurance. A notification chimed. One viewer, then two, then dozens. Elena swallowed hard and pressed the button she had been staring at for nearly an hour. "Hi," she said softly, her voice barely steady. "I don't really know how to start this." Comments began to appear, scrolling faster than she expected. Some were supportive, others confused. She kept going, afraid that if she stopped, she would never begin again. She explained that she wasn't here for attention, and she wasn't here to destroy anyone. She was here because carrying the truth alone had started to feel heavier than any consequence. She spoke about fear without naming its source, about losing herself while trying to keep a relationship alive, about being told again and again that she was overreacting, too sensitive, imagining things. Each sentence felt like stepping onto thin ice, but the more she spoke, the steadier her voice became. As the viewer count climbed, Elena felt exposed and strangely relieved. This was the first time she had said these things out loud without being interrupted or corrected. Her phone vibrated with messages she didn't open. She kept her eyes on the camera as if it were the only witness that mattered. For a moment, she wondered who was watching in silence. Old friends, strangers, people who sensed pain because they carried their own. She hoped someone listening might recognize themselves in her words and feel less alone, even if she never got the chance to explain everything fully. "There's something you all deserve to know," she said after a long pause. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders dropped. "The person you think you know isn't who he pretends to be." The room seemed to hold its breath with her. For a brief second, Elena allowed herself to imagine what would happen next. Maybe disbelief, maybe anger, maybe freedom. She never got to finish the thought. A sound came from somewhere behind her, faint but unmistakable. Her eyes flicked away from the screen. The comments exploded with questions as her expression changed. "Wait," she whispered, reaching for the phone. The live froze, then cut to black. Silence followed. Instantly morning light once filled Elena's life with reassurance. In the beginning of her marriage, she believed daylight meant safety. Marcus would kiss her forehead before work, straighten his tie in the mirror, and remind her how lucky they were. Their photos told a story of balance and devotion, framed smiles and coordinated outfits, the kind people paused to admire while scrolling. Friends often said she had won at life. Marcus was calm, thoughtful, admired at work, the sort of man who listened carefully and spoke gently. At dinners, he held Elena's hand and finished her sentences, which everyone mistook for closeness. No one noticed how she grew quieter each time he spoke for her, or how relief replaced her smile when the evening ended. Control never arrived loudly. It slipped in as concern. Marcus suggested what she should wear because the world could be cruel. He asked where she was going because he worried. He read her messages because transparency, he said, was the foundation of trust. Elena learned to offer explanations before being asked, to apologize for moods she didn't understand. Narration drifts through months that felt identical. Elena stopped meeting friends alone. She delayed phone calls until Marcus wasn't nearby. When she questioned these changes, he reminded her how much he sacrificed, how unstable she could be, how grateful she should feel. Doubt slowly replaced memory. She began keeping mental notes instead of arguments because facts were easier to dismiss than feelings. There were good days, too, which made the bad ones harder to name. Weekends away, soft laughter. Promises whispered in the dark about forever. Elena clung to these moments, using them as proof that she was exaggerating everything else. The marriage looked perfect because perfection was carefully maintained. One night, lying awake beside Marcus, Alina stared at the ceiling and realized she couldn't remember the last decision she'd made without asking. The thought scared her, but she buried it under routine. Survival, she believed, meant adaptation. The shift came quietly. Marcus began guarding his phone with a casual urgency she couldn't ignore. Notifications disappeared before she could glance at them. When she asked, he smiled and said work had become demanding. She wanted to believe him because believing was easier than unraveling years of trust. Alina noticed smaller things too, moments that felt insignificant alone. Marcus lowered his voice when answering calls. He stepped outside at odd hours. He slept with his phone face down, as if hiding it from the room itself. Each detail settled inside her like a grain of sand, irritating, impossible to ignore. She felt the walls of the kitchen closing in, the quiet humming of appliances suddenly loud, as if the house itself sensed that a secret had reached its breaking point that afternoon already somehow then. Then came the afternoon that changed the shape of her certainty. Marcus left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered. Alina stood alone with it, heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. She told herself not to look. Privacy mattered, trust mattered. The screen lit up with a message preview from an unfamiliar name. It wasn't romantic or explicit, just a sentence that didn't belong. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, feeling like she was crossing an invisible line she could never uncross. As she unlocked it, Alina understood that whatever she was about to see would either confirm her fear or destroy the life she thought she had built. The door of the bathroom opened behind her, and at the same moment, the truth began to surface. Alina did not confront Marcus that afternoon. Instead, she placed the phone back on the counter exactly where it had been, as if returning it could undo what she had seen. The bathroom door opened, steam following him into the kitchen, and she smiled on instinct. It was the first lie she told herself, that nothing had changed. She convinced herself there had to be an explanation. A colleague, a misunderstanding, a message taken out of context. Marcus moved around the kitchen with familiar ease, talking about his day, unaware or pretending to be. Alina nodded at the right moments, her thoughts racing ahead of his words, replaying the sentence she couldn't forget. That night, she lay awake beside him, staring into the dark. She told herself she was tired, that exhaustion made people suspicious. She reminded herself of their history, the years that couldn't possibly end because of a single message. Love, she decided, required benefit of the doubt. Doubt, however, had already taken root. Over the following days, Alina became a quiet observer of her own life. She noticed how Marcus angled his screen away when texting, how his tone sharpened when she asked simple questions. When she mentioned feeling distant, he sighed and said she was imagining problems that didn't exist. She apologized, embarrassed by her own instincts. Narration slows as denial hardens into routine. Alina stopped trusting her reactions. She laughed when she wanted to cry. She learned to edit her questions before speaking, discarding the ones that might irritate him. Each compromise felt small, reasonable, necessary. Together, they formed a silence she mistook for peace. Marcus grew attentive in ways that confused her. He brought flowers home, planned dinners, touched her shoulder gently in public. These gestures felt like reassurance, proof that her fears were irrational. She clung to them, using his kindness as evidence against her own unease. But unease does not disappear when ignored. It waits. Alina began keeping track of dates, of moments that felt wrong. She didn't write them down, only memorized them, afraid that recording the truth would make it real. Her mind became a crowded place, full of questions with nowhere to go. One evening, a message appeared on her phone from an unknown number. It was brief, cautious, almost apologetic. The sender said they didn't know how else to reach her, and that Alina deserved honesty. Her chest tightened as she read it twice. She deleted the message immediately, heart pounding. Another lie followed quickly, that deleting it meant it no longer mattered. She told herself outsiders didn't belong in her marriage. Whatever was happening could be handled privately. Yet sleep abandoned her that night. The unknown number lingered in her thoughts, heavier than the message Marcus had received. Alina realized denial required constant effort, and she was growing tired. At work, Alina found herself staring at screens without seeing them, replaying conversations in her head. Every compliment from Marcus now felt measured, every smile slightly delayed. She wondered when trust had turned into vigilance, and whether it had happened gradually or all at once. The possibility that she had been protecting a version of him that never truly existed unsettled her more than any message. By the time evening arrived, she sensed that pretending was becoming more dangerous than knowing. By morning, she understood something had shifted. The truth was no longer outside her door. It was inside her, pressing, patient. And soon someone else would knock again, refusing to be ignored. Soon. Elena did not reply to the unknown number for 2 days, but its presence followed her everywhere. At night, she lay awake listening to the quiet apartment, replaying the message she had deleted, wondering what kind of honesty required such caution. By the third evening, exhaustion outweighed fear, and she typed a single word before she could change her mind. Why? The reply came an hour later. The woman introduced herself as Leela and apologized for reaching out this way. She said she had debated staying silent, but silence had cost her too much already. Elena's hands shook as she read, recognizing a familiar restraint in every sentence. They met in a cafe far from Elena's neighborhood, chosen deliberately. Leela arrived first, sitting with her back to the wall, eyes scanning the room. She looked ordinary, composed, but something in her posture suggested practiced vigilance. When Elena sat down, neither spoke immediately. Leela finally broke the silence, her voice low and careful. She said Marcus had once promised her a future, then slowly dismantled her sense of self. Every concern she raised became proof of her instability. Every boundary she asked for became an accusation against her loyalty. Elena listened, heart pounding, as details aligned with her own experience. The same phrases, the same apologies, the same moments of affection that followed episodes of doubt. It felt like overhearing her private thoughts spoken aloud by a stranger. Leela warned her not to underestimate how quickly charm could turn to threat. She described nights of confusion, mornings filled with regret for ever questioning him. Leaving had not been dramatic, only terrifyingly quiet. She said the danger came when truth began to surface. Elena asked why Leela was telling her now. Leela hesitated, then admitted she had seen the Instagram live notification and felt panic. She recognized the look in Elena's eyes before the stream ended. Some truths, she said, could not stay buried. When they parted, Elena felt both lighter and more afraid. Validation replaced doubt, but certainty brought responsibility. She walked home replaying every word, realizing the story she lived inside was larger than her alone. That night, Marcus asked if something was wrong. His tone was gentle, rehearsed. Elena said nothing, but the silence between them felt different now, charged with knowledge she could no longer pretend she didn't have. She understood then that staying quiet was no longer neutral. Someone else carried the same scars, the same fear, the same memories rewritten to serve him. Elena realized that speaking was dangerous, but remaining silent might be worse. As Elena lay awake before dawn, her phone rested on her chest like a weight. She thought of Leela's warning of how truth never arrives gently. The live video from earlier replayed in her mind, her own voice steadier than she remembered. For the first time, she considered that telling the truth publicly might protect her, or at least leave evidence behind. The thought frightened her, yet it also offered a strange sense of control she had not felt in years. Elena turned toward Marcus's sleeping form and understood that whatever came next would fracture the illusion they had built. Somewhere in the dark, another voice waited to be heard, and Elena knew she was closer than ever to pressing a button she could never undo. It would begin with listening, with gathering every fragment of truth before it disappeared. She did not yet know how or when, only that the silence was cracking. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would stop running from the dark and finally let the voices speak. Even if it shattered everything she thought she understood about love. And even if it meant facing consequences she could no longer avoid. Her life was already changing, whether she admitted it or not. Truth had begun knocking, and this time she heard it, clearly, no turning back now, ever. After meeting Leela, Elena moved through her days with a new, restless purpose. Silence no longer felt like protection. It felt like complicity. She began waking earlier than Marcus, sitting alone at the kitchen table while the city was still dark, replaying conversations and searching her memory for details she once dismissed. She started collecting fragments of her life, screenshots of messages Marcus forgot to delete, dates when his stories changed slightly, notes typed and erased on her phone because even saving them felt dangerous. Each detail grounded her, reminding her that what she felt had shape and pattern. Elena practiced speaking when no one was listening. In the shower, she whispered sentences she had never said aloud. At red lights, she mouthed words into the mirror. The truth sounded fragile at first, like it might collapse under its own weight, but repetition gave it strength. Marcus sensed the shift. He asked more questions, watched her more closely. His concern sharpened, carrying an edge she recognized now. Alina learned to perform normalcy carefully, measuring her tone, keeping her face still. Preparation required patience as much as courage. At night, she imagined telling one person, then another. The thought of going public terrified her, yet anonymity felt like another form of erasure. She thought of Leela, of the warning that truth becomes most dangerous when it threatens control. Evidence, Alina realized, was not just protection. It was memory made permanent. She tested the Instagram app once, her thumb hovering over the live button before she closed it again. The platform felt absurdly small compared to the weight of what she carried. Still, it offered something she had never been given before: witnesses. Alina recorded voice notes, speaking carefully, pausing when her breath shook. She didn't name Marcus, didn't accuse him directly. She focused on patterns, on how love had been used to quiet her. Listening back made her cry, but it also steadied her resolve. One evening, Marcus asked if she trusted him. The question sounded casual, but his eyes searched her face. Alina answered yes, because saying no would have ended everything too soon. The lie tasted bitter, but it bought her time. By the end of the week, Alina felt prepared in a way she never had before. Fear remained, but it no longer ruled her decisions. She understood that speaking would cost her something, but staying silent had already cost too much. She set her phone on the bedside table before sleeping, fully charged. The choice was made, even if the moment was not. Tomorrow she would stop rehearsing and finally let the truth leave her mouth. And once it did, there would be no way to pull it back. Before sleep claimed her, Alina stared at the ceiling and listened to Marcus breathing beside her. Each inhale reminded her how close danger lived to familiarity. She wondered whether courage was something people discovered or something desperation forced into existence. The plan forming in her mind was simple, but the consequences were not. Speaking would expose her to disbelief, to judgment, to retaliation. Yet silence would keep feeding the same darkness that had shaped her marriage. She thought of witnesses again, of how stories change when heard by many instead of one. Tomorrow would begin with ordinary gestures and careful smiles, but it would end with a decision made in real time. As her eyes finally closed, Alina accepted that preparation was ending. Action was next. There was no turning back now, only a narrowing path leading toward truth, and whatever waited beyond it for her alone. Now Alina felt the shift the morning after she decided to speak. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It arrived as a tightening in the air, a sense that Marcus was watching more than usual. He asked what time she would be home, then asked again, smiling as if repetition were affection. She answered calmly, careful not to rush her words. Throughout the day, she sensed herself being measured. Messages from Marcus appeared more frequently, each one polite, each one searching for reassurance. Alina responded just enough to avoid suspicion, reminding herself that preparation sometimes meant patience. Still, her pulse refused to slow. That evening, Marcus cooked dinner without saying why. He poured wine, asked about her day, laughed at moments that weren't funny. Alina recognized the performance now, the version of him designed to restore balance. She played her role, nodding, listening, waiting. After dinner, he asked her to sit with him on the couch. His voice was gentle, but his body was rigid. He told her she seemed distant lately, that he worried about her. He said he felt her slipping away. The words sounded caring, but something underneath them felt like pressure. Alina chose her response carefully. She said she had been tired, overwhelmed, unsure of herself. She avoided accusation, avoided truth. Marcus watched her closely, eyes narrowing just enough to notice. Then his tone changed. He reminded her of everything he had done for her, of how much he had supported her when she struggled. He questioned whether outside influences were confusing her. His hand tightened around hers, not painful but firm. For the first time, Alina did not apologize. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Marcus released her hand slowly, as if deciding something. He stood and began pacing, speaking faster now, frustration leaking through his composure. He said trust was fragile. He said secrets destroyed relationships. He asked if there was anything she wanted to tell him. The question landed between them like a test she was never meant to pass. Alina felt fear rise, sharp and familiar, but beneath it was something new, steadier. She realized that no answer would satisfy him unless it restored his control. The mask, once cracked, was slipping. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her directly. His voice dropped. He warned her not to mistake independence for betrayal. He said people who aired private matters often regretted it. The implication hung in the room, unspoken but clear. Elena stood, her legs unsteady. She said she needed air. Marcus blocked the hallway briefly, then stepped aside, smiling again as if nothing had happened. The switch was seamless, practiced. That night, Elena locked herself in the bathroom and cried silently. The encounter replayed in fragments, each one confirming what she had already accepted. Love was no longer the question. Safety was. She stared at her phone, hands shaking, and understood that time had narrowed. Marcus sensed the shift because it was real. Waiting longer would not make this easier. It would only make it riskier. When she returned to bed, Marcus was already asleep or pretending to be. Elena lay beside him, eyes open, counting breaths. The decision she had prepared for was no longer theoretical. It was urgent. By morning, she would act. Not because she was brave, but because the mask had slipped and she had seen what lived underneath. The truth would not survive another rehearsal. It needed witnesses. And she knew exactly where to find them. She remembered Leela's warning, the quiet urgency in her voice, and felt it echo now. Control thrived in private spaces, in conversations without records. Public light, however imperfect, changed the balance. Elena did not want revenge or spectacle. She wanted acknowledgement, proof that her reality existed beyond his denial. That desire settled her breathing, even as fear pressed closer than ever. Tonight would force the truth a place he feared. Night fell slowly, as if the city itself hesitated to arrive at the moment Elena had chosen. She waited until Marcus left the apartment, listening to the door close, the sound echoing longer than usual. Silence followed, heavy but temporary. She knew he would return. That knowledge pressed urgency into every breath. Elena moved through the apartment carefully, turning off unnecessary lights, closing the curtains halfway. She chose the bedroom because it felt honest, because this was where most of the truth had lived. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she placed her phone in front of her and checked the battery twice. Full. Enough. Her reflection stared back from the dark screen. She barely recognized herself. The woman looking at her appeared thinner, steadier, resolved in a way fear had never allowed before. Elena inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the quiet seconds she still controlled. She opened Instagram. Her finger hovered over the live option, trembling despite her preparation. For a moment, she considered sending one last message to Leela, a warning or a goodbye. She decided against it. This was something she had to do alone. When she pressed the button, the screen shifted instantly. The camera activated. The red icon appeared. She was live. At first, there were only a few viewers. Elena stared into the lens, heart-pounding, unsure how to begin. Then she spoke, softly, honestly, letting the words come without polish. She said she wasn't there to accuse or destroy. She said she was there because silence had become unbearable. More viewers joined. Comments appeared, scrolling quickly. Elena focused on the camera instead, imagining it as a single, listening presence. She spoke about confusion, about slowly losing confidence, about being told her feelings were wrong. She described love that felt conditional, concern that disguised control. Her voice shook, then steadied. Each sentence felt like lifting weight from her chest. She didn't name Marcus. She didn't need to. She described patterns, not events, emotions instead of allegations. It felt safer that way, truer. She paused once, swallowing hard, and acknowledged her fear. She admitted she didn't know what would happen after this. The honesty drew more viewers, more quiet messages of support flashing across the screen. Elena glanced briefly at the viewer count, startled by how high it had climbed. Strangers were listening, witnessing. She realized then that whatever followed, the truth had already left her body. It existed now beyond her. "There's something important you should know," she said carefully. "About the man I married." The room felt suddenly smaller. Elena became aware of every sound, every creak of the building. She kept speaking, describing betrayal without detail, manipulation without spectacle. Her words were calm, measured, practiced for this exact moment. She felt strangely clear. Fear was still present, but it no longer guided her. The act of speaking created distance between her and the life she had lived in silence. She sensed that she was crossing something irreversible. A sound interrupted her thought. Faint but real, the front door. Elena's eyes flicked away from the screen for less than a second. The comments exploded with confusion. She tried to refocus, to finish what she had started, but the air in the room shifted. Footsteps. Her breath caught. She reached toward the phone instinctively, as if to protect it or herself. The camera captured her hesitation, the sudden tension in her face. "Wait," she whispered, not sure to whom. The image froze for a moment, then the screen went black. Somewhere outside the frame, the truth had been spoken, and someone had heard it. The screen went black, leaving thousands staring at their phones in silence. Comments continued for a few seconds, confused questions stacking on top of each other before the live officially ended. Somewhere in the city, sirens wailed distantly, ordinary sounds continuing as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Inside the apartment, time fractured. Alina's phone lay face down on the bed, still warm, still connected to the moment she could never return to. The quiet felt unnatural, thick with unfinished sentences and held breath. Whatever had happened next unfolded beyond the camera, beyond witnesses. Within minutes, messages flooded in. Friends, strangers, concerned viewers asking if she was safe. No replies came. The silence stretched, unsettling in its certainty. People refreshed their screens, hoping for an update that never appeared. Neighbors later described hearing raised voices, then nothing at all. A door opening. A door closing. The building returned to its usual rhythm, unaware of the weight it now carried. The truth had entered the world, and then its source vanished. By the time authorities arrived, the night had deepened. Red and blue lights reflected off windows, painting the street in brief, trembling color. Those watching from a distance sensed something irreversible had taken place, even before details emerged. Online, the video replayed endlessly. Clips were shared, slowed, analyzed. Viewers dissected her expressions, the moment her eyes shifted, the instant fear replaced resolve. Everyone searched for meaning in seconds that now felt monumental. Speculation grew faster than facts. Some insisted it had been a misunderstanding. Others sensed something darker. Alina's words echoed across platforms, stripped of context, magnified by distance. Still, no official statement explained the silence she left behind. Hours later, confirmation arrived without ceremony. Alina was gone. The announcement was brief, restrained, offering no answers. Shock settled into grief, then anger. The question spread quickly and relentlessly. How could speaking the truth lead to this? Marcus's name surfaced almost immediately. Some viewers recognized him from old photographs, from tagged posts, from the life that once appeared perfect. His accounts went silent. Attempts to reach him failed. The absence felt deliberate. By morning, the story had grown beyond Alina herself. Journalists framed headlines carefully. Commentators debated responsibility. Others shared their own stories, inspired by the courage they had witnessed. Her voice, cut short, continued speaking through others. Police tape sealed the entrance as dawn approached, turning the apartment into a place no one could enter and no one could truly leave behind. Officers spoke in low voices while cameras gathered outside, waiting for permission to look closer. Investigators reviewed the footage frame by frame, noting the sound, the timing, the interruption. Every detail mattered now. The live had become evidence, a record no one could erase. As the sun rose, the city moved on, but the internet did not. Alina's final moments lived on screens, in memory, in unresolved questions. Those who had watched the live felt intimacy with what followed. They argued online, formed timelines, demanded accountability from people they had never met. Alina's fear became communal, shared by strangers who felt they had been present through a screen. Leela watched the replay alone, recognizing the moment Alina's courage hardened into resolve. She understood the risk Alina had taken and felt the weight of surviving it. The truth had escaped containment. As investigators expanded their search, one absence grew louder than all others. Marcus had not returned home. His phone was unreachable. His routine dissolved without warning. The man who once controlled the narrative had disappeared from it entirely. With that disappearance, the story shifted. This was no longer only about what Alina revealed, but about who might be willing to silence her. The truth had been spoken. Now it demanded answers. The day after the live ended, Alina's story exploded across the internet. Clips from her stream circulated on social media, shared on platforms far beyond her circle of friends. Screenshots of her words, frozen mid-sentence, appeared in feeds worldwide. Each view carried a weight she could no longer control. Online, people argued, sympathized, and condemned all at once. Comments ranged from disbelief to support. Some accused her of exaggeration. Others recognized themselves in her eyes and voice, writing long threads about manipulation, emotional abuse, and betrayal. Alina had become more than a person in a private apartment. She had become a symbol. Digital footprints multiplied. Hashtags appeared, some naming her courage, others questioning the circumstances of her disappearance. The algorithm amplified everything, giving her a voice she could no longer wield, but that wielded influence over thousands. It was paradoxical. She was gone, yet everywhere. Journalists sought interviews with neighbors, colleagues, and anyone who had interacted with her in the days leading up to the live. They reconstructed her life in fragments, piecing together the cracks Marcus had tried to conceal. The public consumed every detail, hungry for context, for a reason for understanding. Meanwhile, viewers who had not known her personally began sharing similar experiences. Stories emerged in comment threads and personal accounts, some anonymous, some brave enough to name abusers. Each confession added layers to the narrative Alina had left behind, transforming her private revelation into a collective reckoning. The footage of the live became evidence in ways she could never have imagined. Even without authorities, it existed as proof of fear, of courage, and of truths too long silenced. People debated how much was visible, how much was implied, and what it meant that someone had dared to speak while others stayed quiet. The video replayed endlessly, analyzed in hours-long streams, dissected in viral clips, and memorialized in screenshots. As the days passed, Marcus remained absent. Rumors of his whereabouts spread online. Sightings, unconfirmed accounts, speculation about whether he would face consequences. The internet refused to forget him or the events he had inadvertently created. His silence contrasted sharply with Alina's amplified voice. Even Leela found herself caught in the wave. Messages arrived from strangers who had recognized their own pain in the story she had shared with Alina. She realized the warning she had once given was not just for Alina. It applied to anyone forced to live under the shadow of control. The echoes of one life began to shift the lives of many. By the end of the week, it was clear. The internet had preserved Alina's truth, for better or worse. Memory, accountability, and public consciousness had merged. The private act of courage had transformed into a public reckoning, unstoppable and unyielding. Yet among the viral threads, the unanswered questions lingered. Who else had known? Who could be trusted? And most pressing, where was Marcus, the man at the center of it all? The story had grown beyond her. The web of observation, judgment, and consequence continued to expand, and no one could tell where it would end. The truth had been spoken, and the world would not allow it to be ignored. But for those closest to it, the consequences were only beginning to unfold. What started as a private act of courage had ignited a chain of revelations, each one darker, stranger, and more complicated than the last. The internet remembered everything, and soon so would the world beyond it.
The investigation into Alina's disappearance and the events surrounding her live stream moved forward quietly, methodically. Authorities examined every frame of the footage, retraced her last known movements, and interviewed neighbors, colleagues, and Leela. Each question was precise, each answer carefully measured. There were no dramatic confessions, no sudden arrest, only the slow accumulation of facts, the tedious work of understanding what had already happened. Detectives noted patterns, inconsistencies, and timing, connecting messages, social media activity, and the accounts of those who had seen her final moments. Marcus was absent, and his absence complicated everything. Without him, the narrative remained incomplete, leaving investigators with fragments rather than clarity. The press reported cautiously. Headlines focused on courage, disappearance, and speculation. Public outrage simmered, but the procedural pace of law reminded everyone that justice is rarely immediate, rarely cinematic. Those expecting swift resolution were left frustrated, while others quietly studied the evidence, learning lessons about control, secrecy, and manipulation. Leela became a reluctant participant in the investigation. She recounted the years she had endured similar patterns of control, providing context for the psychological pressure Marcus applied to Alina. Her voice, calm and measured, contrasted with the chaos of online speculation. Investigators relied on her testimony to understand motives, behaviors, and the subtle ways abuse could escalate without anyone noticing. The courtroom became a theater of restraint. Witnesses spoke softly, evidence was presented methodically, and the narrative was built slowly, piece by piece. Alina's voice, captured in the live stream, became central to the proceedings. It was never loud, never theatrical, yet it carried undeniable weight. Each pause, each carefully spoken word, revealed truths that no one could dismiss. The legal system moved in its deliberate rhythm. Arguments were raised and countered. Motives were analyzed, timelines reconstructed. Technical details of the live stream, the messages, and Marcus's absence became crucial. Outside, the internet debated the case endlessly, dissecting each public update. Inside the courtroom, progress was measured and quiet. Elena's absence made every testimony heavier. Her life, her courage, and the truth she had spoken remained the core of the proceedings. Justice was being pursued, but it was subtle, procedural, and painfully slow. Each small victory, the validation of her experiences, the acknowledgement of her courage, was significant but understated. As days passed, patterns emerged. Investigators identified contradictions in Marcus's statements to friends and colleagues. Evidence suggested he had known the live stream would expose him, and his disappearance was deliberate. Yet without a confession or direct witness, consequences were delayed. The tension between public awareness and private action created a strange dissonance. Elena's voice had traveled far, but justice was quiet. By the end of the chapter, a new piece of evidence surfaced, a voice note Elena had recorded but never shared publicly, describing moments of subtle threats she had endured. Its existence added weight to the case and hinted at the next chapter of consequences. The world had heard part of her story, but now the investigation held the keys to uncovering the rest. Justice, Elena realized through the fragments she had left, is rarely dramatic. It is often patient, slow, and silent, accumulating quietly until the truth can no longer be denied. And in that silence, her story continued to matter, shaping the outcome even as she remained absent. The path forward was unclear, but it was inevitable, and the next revelation would demand attention. Elena was gone, but her voice continued to ripple across lives. The clips, the recordings, the words she had spoken, the fragments of truth, were shared, replayed, analyzed. People who had never met her felt they knew her courage. Her story became more than a private tragedy. It was a lesson, a warning, a reminder that silence has a cost and that speaking, even briefly, can change everything. Leela watched the impact with a quiet mix of grief and awe. She realized that Elena's bravery had done what years of hidden endurance could not. It reached others. Women and men alike sent messages of gratitude, sharing their own stories of quiet suffering. Elena's experience became a mirror in which others recognized patterns of control, manipulation, and fear they had endured alone. Social media became a living archive of her truth. Every comment, every shared post, every tribute kept her voice alive. Even strangers who had never interacted with her directly were moved to reflect, to question, to confront their own experiences. Elena's words had transcended her absence, proving that truth, once spoken, cannot be erased. Authorities continued to investigate Marcus, following leads that had been set in motion by Elena's live stream. The process was slow and methodical, but it moved inevitably toward accountability. Each new discovery confirmed what she had already known, quietly validating the fear and courage that had driven her to speak. In the lives of those closest to her, the echoes were more personal. Leela, inspired by Elena's courage, began reaching out to others, offering support and guidance. Friends who had doubted themselves found validation in her story. The ripple effect of one woman's truth created a network of awareness, a small but significant force against abuse and manipulation. Elena's absence was palpable, but so was her presence. Objects she had touched, spaces she had occupied, now carried a quiet memory of resistance. Her phone, the camera, the notes she had prepared, they were evidence of intent, of clarity, of determination that had refused to be silenced. The public discussion evolved, moving beyond speculation to reflection. People considered how emotional abuse is often invisible, how patterns are dismissed until consequences become undeniable. Elena's story became a touchstone for conversations that had long been avoided, teaching that recognition is the first step toward prevention. Her voice had been fleeting, captured in a few minutes of live video, yet its influence outlasted her life. The courage it represented inspired awareness, conversation, and action. Elena's story proved that the act of speaking can survive even when the speaker cannot, shaping perspectives and affecting lives long after the moment has passed. And so, though she was gone, Elena remained, not in presence, but in impact, not in sound, but in resonance. Her voice continued to remind the world that truth matters, that courage is contagious, and that even in silence, the echoes of one brave act can persist indefinitely. The world had heard her, and in that listening, her story endured.